Cool. Welcome, everyone. As you know from the sign above, welcome to Session Prep. I'm your Game Master, GMBenn, and this is my co-host up in the corner over there. My D20 Mimic, currently known as Thacko, but with Mimics, you never can pin down a name. And I'm here to help prepare your next session. I stream odd Sundays, like today at 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can catch me 2 weeks from today again on Sunday, April 23rd. And today we are talking about dun 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 dun. Although maybe it should be like dun 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 dun. Fear, horror, and madness, and I think maybe ways that we can make them better in our games. We don't have to use a system if it's not working the way that we want it at our tables. It's one of the things that draws me to games like Dungeons and Dragons, other role-playing games, is the customizability, the kind of toolbox you have at your disposal when you get together with a group. You decide what rules you want to use, and that's kind of what Fear, Horror, and Madness is. It's an extra tool in the GM's toolbox that you can use with your game, and there's different ways to use it, and there's different ones available. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you're tuning in on Twitch, we see Dice Station Zebra in the chat. Welcome. Feel free to type up. I was going to say speak up, but type up at any time. Ask your questions. Interrupt if you want. Maybe I'll look at the chat. No, I always do. But if I'm in the middle of a point, I might hold your question for a bit. If you are tuning in later, of course, sorry that you missed the live stream, but be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Hit a follow on Twitch if you want to catch future episodes. And you can also, I'm on some of the socials. You can also follow me on, let's see if I can get this, TikTok, down here. TikTok and Twitch at GMBenn Show. If I get, I'm not currently not using my own Twitch channel, but if I get 100 followers on my Twitch channel, I may launch a second show. That's my promise to my audience. If you preemptively follow me on Twitch at GMBenn Show, I may launch a second show where we talk about something else DMing related. And you can follow me if you want to find out when that's happening. You can follow me on Twitter. YouTube, I put up some tiny clips from this show. I have all the good stuff. None of the bad stuff, I hope. Yeah, to get started, I wanted to throw a question out to the chat. Has anyone here, or who here has, run a horror game? Which of you have used some of these rules before, or not used the rules? But if you at all said, if you're a Dungeon Master and you at all said, I'm gonna make this session scary, and you tried to do that, I want to hear about it in the chat. What did you do it before? And what adventure or what type of horror did you run? And we may get a bit of time today to talk about the different types of horror. I think that's covered quite nicely in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, so we don't need to belabor it. But some of the different styles, like body horror, the grotesqueness of mutilation and ultraviolence, can turn our stomachs. That's a form of horror. So is just the creepy, like the darkness has fallen deeper than even the torches can penetrate, and somewhere off in the distance drags like a lone chain. Even though what you can't see can be very spooky. Another genre of horror. So if anyone in the chat has GM'd a game, I'd love to hear in a sentence what type of adventure you ran. Or if not, I can move forward with some of the other things that we've got planned today. But I always like when chat jumps in with some of their own ideas. We have is, I'm here to kind of talk through some things that I've thought about and how I've used things in my game, but we've had equally good, excellent ideas come out of chat, and we've all kind of gotten together and come up with good tips for Dungeon Masters and how to run a good game. Go to the most horrific music today. Didn't need to be too spooky. This isn't a Halloween episode. I kind of want to get into the nuts and bolts of Fear, Horror, and Madness, because the reason being, and I hinted over there, making better Fear, Horror, and Madness, because I'm not really satisfied myself in my games with the systems of Fear, Horror, and Madness as they're presented in the rules. I think right from the get-go we need a different system, and a lot of RPGs have grappled with it, so we're not taking stab in the dark. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The expression goes, or we don't have to reinvent the D20, might be a better expression. We can use some of these systems from the game, use parts of them, use other parts of them, put it together, make it our own. I think something that needs to be said from the start in this stream, but also in your own horror game, is the importance of session 0. The importance of session 0. What is session 0? Session 0 is the conversation that your group has before playing, essentially. It doesn't need to be its own session. That's why it doesn't get a number. You don't need to actually gather to do what a session 0 can accomplish. It could be a Facebook chat. Often a lot of dungeon masters will do session 0 in a style that is, one-on-one with their players. Kind of get it, like, let everyone be heard by the dungeon master. Let the dungeon master clearly state the campaign. But essentially, session 0 is even more important for the topics of fear, horror, and madness, because these grapple with something that a lot of role-playing game players have had in their own life. You know, fear, horror, and madness engages with themes of mental health. It engages with PTSD. It engages with these kinds of icky topics, difficult topics, and it tries to do it. It doesn't pretend to be therapy, although some people have said it can help them. It ultimately is just there to entertain us, right? We're engaging with these topics because they're fun. We like being scared if we like a horror game. So if that's your approach to it, and I would recommend care if you're taking another approach, but if your approach is we're doing this to have fun, then it's important to have the session 0 to make sure that it stays fun. This is true whenever you're going to deal with difficult topics that your group has had, finds difficult or particularly difficult and wants to be careful with. And so it's an extra thing you should check on with fear, horror, and madness. I do think you don't always have to meet to have the session 0. The fact that if you're running a horror game and you tell your players, I'm running a horror game, it will involve difficult or spooky, or you can be vague, keep your adventure, but you kind of give the little heads up of the genre of horror that you're going to be doing. You say, it's going to be like the movie The Descent, we're going underground. It's going to be like the movie playing Curse of Strahd. You say it's going to be like a lot of traditional vampire movies. Just a heads up that deals with difficult themes of spooky men taking advantage, spooky men with supernatural powers, powerful spooky men taking advantage of women, so common in vampire tropes. This is kind of something that's important to mention when you're going to be running a vampire game or Curse of Strahd. As they talk about it a little bit, I believe it's Tracy Hickman has the foreword to Curse of Strahd and writes a little bit about that in a nice little summary. If you are clear up front with your party of what you're going to run, that's a kind of a session 0. That counts, I can also point you towards 2 interesting toolkits online for this that I think are useful and important to consider when you're running a horror game. There's something called, Shift 70 Up says, I think a session 0 should be something you always do. Only exception is if you have been playing with the same players for years, even then making sure everyone's on the same page. 100% Shift 70 Up, 100%. I'm with you on that. When I say that you don't need a session 0, I mean you can do the same things a session 0 can do in other ways, but you still need to do those things. Like for example, I won't do your game. Fair enough. I absolutely respect that. But I'll tell you how I would handle a session 0 sometimes. I would, as a dungeon master, I would lay out everything that I want the players to know in advance. I would say we're going to be engaging with this horror game is going underground. Let's say it's going to have themes of claustrophobia, isolation, survival. It's going to be gritty. You're going to run out of resources. That's what I'm going to play. I'm letting everyone know in advance, and then I say, who wants to play that this Wednesday? Who wants to play that 2 weeks from Wednesday? So it's kind of it's fully informed. It's a circumstance of fully informed consent with my players that I'm letting them know we're going to be playing a horror game, and I'd ask them, would you like to play? And because I would do that one-on-one, that always gives an opportunity for a player to speak up and let me know their thoughts. But if they say, I don't want to do claustrophobia, I say, that's no problem. This adventure may not be for you, but this is the one that I kind of want to run this Wednesday, so if it's not for you, I totally respect that. That's what I mean by, it has all the outcomes of a session 0, but it can be done one-on-one. Arrow Slow says, a Hero's Love says, is this going to be on the Goodman Games YouTube channel or the GMBenn channel? Thank you for asking. Yeah, this is, since it's on the Goodman Games Twitch, this will be on the Goodman Games channel. I just put like 30-second snippets on my YouTube. I'll chop them up a little bit and share them around so more people can see some of the stuff that we talk about here. No, this replay of this will be both on the Goodman Games Twitch and the Goodman Games official YouTube channel. Can't recommend those channels enough. Lots of great content there, including a lot of great actual plays. It'd be fun to do a horror actual play for the live stream. Might be something to think of for October. So 2 tools that for session 0 style information that I highly recommend for your players, or variations of them, is a system of lines and veils. And I believe this is by Ron Edwards. Essentially, and even if I'm doing a one-sided session 0 where I just give my players all the information they need in advance to do an informed consent, that's kind of letting them know what the lines and veils are going to be like at that session. So lines and veils are essentially, you can use a checkbox, there's sheets for it. It's a concept of your players will tell you, I would, a line is don't cross it. So for example, one of my lines as a dungeon master is I don't want sex scenes at my table. Like this doesn't have to do with horror, but I'm like, I do not want to roleplay a sex scene with you, please and thanks. So that'll be one of my lines. They don't happen. But veils are where they can be, the event can be known, it can happen in the world. It's almost like every character in my games are like asexual. No one engages in sexuality. It doesn't happen. It's like that's the world we're living in. The games aren't PG, but the relationships are PG at my table, you know. But the veils are the concepts can exist in the world. People can talk about them, but whenever it's about to happen, you fade to black. Essentially, it's off camera. Veils are off camera information. So for example, if sex scenes are behind a veil for you. This may have happened in one of my games. Someone was seducing an NPC, and I think vice versa. I think they were into each other. And they went off to an in-room, and it was like fade to black. We're not going up to the in-room with them. Let it be in the imaginations of those who so wish to imagine it. That's behind a veil. And so that topic, I use sex scenes as an example, but that works great for horror as well, where if you're doing a long-term horror campaign where you're going to be writing a new adventure every 3 weeks and you're going to keep going through the Mists of Ravenloft, for example, so you're going to change the genre a lot, then you need this. You could use this lines and veils system with your player. Someone could say to you, look, I'm really arachnophobic. I really don't like spiders. So they're a line for me. And I would be like, oh, that's no problem. Like, we're compatible. You don't like spiders? I can just not do an adventure with spiders. Easiest choice. I have a player, I won't point anyone out, but I do have a player that has experiences or some fears of claustrophobia. But they did play Out of the Abyss with me. They tackled going deep underground where the miles of rock above you. It was very brave of them. And they just said, and this is where X cards can come in, another system, the X card. I believe, X cards are by, I wonder if I can spell this right from memory. John Stavropoulos. I got my marker got a little muddy at the end just to save myself the spelling. John Stavropoulos has the X card theory online. You can look up either of these. They're great systems. X card is you put, and I've used this as well, like in my session 0 or session 0 information, I'll tell my players, we're gonna use an X card. So you can use it as a physical card, or once your players are used to it, you can just say, oh, X card. You set a card with an X on it in the middle of the table, and at any time, anyone can point to it or pick it up and say X card. And for example, if 2 players are starting to role play a sex scene, I might just go, X card. I don't want to DM this. And likewise, the players could say, oh, you described that spider's legs moving along the wall in much too creepy of a fashion, X card. So that's where, if you didn't, something may come up in a game and you didn't know that you crossed a line or you're getting close to a veil, and X card helps people flag that. And Shift 70 said they wouldn't play in a game if someone doesn't have a session 0. And yeah, I would say I wouldn't play in a game with players that didn't respect an X card. Even if you don't have a formalized system, you need to be able to speak up to say, and this formalized system helps it be a bit more natural. You don't have to be diplomatic. You can just say X card. It kind of does the diplomacy for you. But if someone has a limit and they mention it and they say it out loud, I mean, everyone needs to respect that. So I think those are two important things to talk about before getting into Fear, Horror, and Madness. And they're two important things to talk about with your campaign before getting into it for us and for your campaign. And I think they are, as I was saying, particularly important for Fear, Horror, and Madness because of the nature of, like, we're dealing with fictional fear and fictional madnesses, but they can hit close to home for some people. So that's why it's important. So I was wondering who, if anyone tuning in late or joining us, has anyone used as a dungeon master or as a player, has anyone used the madness system from the Dungeon Master's Guide? Has anyone used that system? DMG madness. Well, if someone has some thoughts on that, I will put into our good copy here. Do a session 0. And I'll add the two topics here. Lines of Veils X cards, add that. Yeah. So the DMG system, this is my main nitpick that made me want to do this this episode, is because the DMG system is lacking. I think it's upside down from the get-go, and not just because it's a little bit campy. There's the trope of the, like, Renfield in Dracula, who's in a mental health institution, back then an insane asylum. And he's always played on the screen in movies by, of course, actually the new Renfield movie may tackle it differently, but I'm thinking of the classic Dracula movies, and Renfield is played as kind of like the stereotypical, like, drooling madman. And these stereotypes are weird because they're not based in fact at all. Like, your games don't need to get too real, but these can't be over the top stereotypes. You may want to use them in your game, but they're kind of flat. They're kind of not genuine, and your game can be much more interesting, much richer if you engage with these topics with I guess a more robust or more multifaceted or more genuine way to bring a fear, horror, and madness to the table. I think we can all do much better than the slavering lunatic from Renfield from Dracula. And the Dungeon Master's Guide, it pushes us in that direction. You know, like, I have one of them here, but like it says it's got short-term madness, long-term madness, and indefinite. And it says that you creep your way up that, like, up that tier, so you'd start short-term. But oh my goodness, starting short-term, like, the character, you roll on a D100, right? 0, 1 to 20. 1 in 5 chance. Essentially, the character retreats in his or mind and becomes paralyzed. Effect ends if the character takes any damage. So, just like frozen in place paralysis. That's one of the more accurate ones a little bit, but then you have things like the character becomes incapacitated and spends duration screaming, laughing, or weeping. Spends the duration incapacitated. Incapacitated can't take actions, and this is 1d10 minutes. That's the kind of Renfield like drooling lunatic stereotype that's just weak at the table. And then imagine this is your system. You got a creepy moment. You've essentially sent, let's say your adventurer is going to a dungeon and you want the dungeon to be horror. So it's dungeon crawling with a horror twist. And you've essentially sent some, like, red shirts, the Star Wars, not Star Wars, don't shoot me for that. the Star Trek military officers that are going with them under the stereotype that they're going to perish to show us how dangerous it is. So unbeknownst to your party, you've essentially sent a red shirt with them, a little helper from the town, and you've already planned that the red shirt is going to go first, and that will set the tone of how dangerous it is. So you have a horrifying scene where the creepy monster is not fully seen yet, but it's something in the darkness, and just at the limits of dim light, or beyond the range of dark vision, your red shirt's torch goes out, and in the darkness you hear the sounds of like his demise, and it can be as gruesome as you feel is reasonable with your lines and veils of your party, but you can describe the sound of the body being torn apart in the darkness, and you'd say, okay, everyone, make a wisdom saving throw against fear, horror, madness, and someone fails. And they become, you roll on this chart, the character falls 91 to 100, 1 in 10 chance. The character falls unconscious for 1d10 minutes. It's like, well, that's a great little twist to your D&D campaign, is they see a red shirt perish right in front of them, and suddenly one of your party members is unconscious for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, that's like 5 encounters if they're back to back. And someone else is incapacitated, so 2 party members are out for the count immediately as the monster attacks. Like, that is not only a kind of an over-the-top representation of madness. I mean, that's the rules as written in the Dungeon Master's Guide, right? Obviously, it's on the DM of choosing when and where you ask for those sanity saves, but that's short-term. That's short-term effects of something horrific happening. So that's how the system has been kind of envisioned until Van Richten's came along and gave us, a little bit of a better system. But the concept was, if something is scary, you have to roll a wisdom saving throw, and if you fail it, you might suffer a small element of madness. But they did not make those elements of madness small. It seems like 2 different people mashed together the systems in the last printing of the Dungeon Master's Guide. They didn't know where they were going with that. But there is something worth rescuing from the Dungeon Master's Guide system. It's not all in need of purging or correcting or something like that. I think the Indefinite Madness flaws, which the Dungeon Master's Guide says save for the most severe instance, but I think the flaws are quite rich. I think the short-term madness doesn't work very well, but I think the indefinite flaws work much better. I think they're an example of a great way to do madness where you're not taking over someone's character. So picture that it goes a little differently. You skip short term, you skip long term, you go right to the indefinite madness flaws. The red shirt is ahead, the torch goes out, we hear the sounds of whatever this monstrosity that the characters are going to have to confront. We hear the sounds of that monstrosity truly destroying the life of the red shirt. And then you say, all of you need to roll a wisdom saving throw against indefinite madness. Then you get something much more interesting. You've got you roll randomly on the chart. Someone gets being drunk keeps me sane as a flaw. So how do flaws work? You write it down your character sheet, or you have it on a card because it's temporary. You could hand it to them secretly. It's a prompt that if the player role plays that, they can earn inspiration. It's not forced on them. They could kind of ignore it. So this character who just witnessed the red shirt die realizes that they need a stiff drink, and they need, in order to deal with this horrible dungeon they're going into, they need to stay inebriated. But when I say need, that's kind of an impulse that the fear is telling them that they feel, and they can choose not to follow that, and they just won't. It's just a trade-off. It's an opportunity to earn inspiration. That's what a flaw is, which I love a lot. I think that's a great way to take it. Someone else rolls, and you may want to roll a couple times or pick the indefinite madness flaw that is most appropriate to the trigger. I think connecting indefinite madness flaws, if you're playing your adventure in advance, connecting indefinite madness flaws to what caused them is a more appropriate way to go. So the monster, coming out of the darkness, I got the table here. What would be a great one? 86 to 95, quote, a flaw. A flaw says, I can't take anything seriously. The more serious the situation, the funnier I find it. That is so much richer then you fall laughing for 5 minutes and cannot act because you're incapacitated. It's like, no, develop a flaw. You must find things funny as a form of as an emotional armor, so you're not decimated by the effect you saw. Ryan Immel DM. Ryan Immel DM also live streams, by the way. I recommend everyone check out Ryan's channel with other gaming prep videos. Says, I've also taken inspiration from the board game The Mansions of Madness for stuff like this. Oh, highly recommend digging into any other board game for or RPG. I was tempted in this stream to just explore the Call of Cthulhu. I think the D20 Call of Cthulhu is one that I'm more familiar with than the original Call of Cthulhu versions, but something like that comes along with great material to just port immediately over. But of course, the people who wrote D20 Call of Cthulhu, all their content is owned, copyright by Wizards of the Coast, so it inspired what they developed in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. It kind of one led to the other. Just kind of funny when I'm disappointed in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Surely they could have done better, you know. It wasn't the same writers exactly, but they had the content to fall back on, and something went wrong. But separate from the Dungeon Master's Guide, I do think the new Van Richten's handled it a bit better. They gave an alternative little mechanic, and I think it's a smidge cleaner. Has anyone played with the Van Richten's rules, by the way? I was wondering, has anyone given those a shot? I know the book's only 1 or 2 years old. Yeah, what's the mechanic? I'll dig into it a little bit here. Van Richten's has this on, yeah, VR. This is still on the page here. I'm writing down here. Van Richten's has they have a Seeds of Fear system. They have 3 little systems in the book. Seeds of Fear are like Indiana Jones being afraid of snakes, or picturing Chris McCandless in Into the Wilds afraid of water. So it's kind of a trope of storytelling that a character has a flaw that is fear, and a Seeds of Fear is a player picks in advance or rolls randomly, just like a personality trait, ideal, bond, or flaw. They pick a fear, and they can earn inspiration when they're confronted by it. I think that system is really clean and well written. I'm not going to say anything negative about it, except I don't think it fits a horror genre. It's a great way to use fear, but in my perspective, Seeds of Fear from Van Richten, having playtested similar, but I have not used their system directly, that is a better way to work fear into a regular game. Picture Indiana Jones being afraid of snakes. Like that is excellent in a campy action adventure. But then picture the movie Anaconda with it's a beast horror movie with a deadly and destructive 50-foot python. And imagine a character is afraid of snakes in that movie. And it's just like, well, we're all afraid of snakes. It's not irrational for you to be afraid of this 50-foot python. It's a 50-foot python. We're all terrified. So I think Seeds of Fear, it's, imagine you've got a character who's afraid of snakes and then you put them into a snake adventure. It's just cruel and unusual. It doesn't seem to connect. I like it. I like Seeds of Fear a lot for casual dips into fear and role-playing seeds for non-horror based games. But if you're diving into full horror, the things that come up should scare everyone. It shouldn't simply scare the character who has the phobia. Intentionally giving a character a phobia and intentionally triggering it can be a little campy. And horror movies, if they get campy, they're funny. They're not horrific. So that's my take on Seeds of Fear. They have another one, which is they can just say a monster doesn't, Van Richten says, I can't remember the wording, a monster doesn't need a special power to cause a character to become frightened, it says. So you can just ask for a wisdom saving throw and make a character frightened until the start of the next turn, similar as a dragon's fear aura. I think that's a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit simpler. Dragons have a fear aura. You just use it in that manner. It's non-magical. It is just simply the fear of the thing you're confronting. Then they My problem with that, though, is the same problem I have with then they have the stress mechanic. Stress mechanic I also think is a little bit elegant, a little bit nice. Stress mechanic I think is being playtested for the next revision is how they might do in exhaustion. But the stress mechanic is that when something horrific or ongoing or debilitating, like spending an entire day without sleeping because you can't rest because the monsters will eat you, or seeing your friends perish, or seeing that red shirt perish, you get one stress tick. And stress ticks accumulate, and you subtract them as a penalty on all ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. So getting the frightened condition for a round, fear save, and stress, which is an ongoing tick that gets worse. Neat little mechanics. But surely when we are paying Wizards of the Coast these very expensive books, they can have playtested these, because these mechanics don't debilitate spellcasters. You know, like your fighter gets frightened, can't approach the bad guy, disadvantage on attack rolls. Your rogue in the back row starts accumulating stress, -1 on all attack rolls. Your wizard gets fear and stress. What does it do? It's a penalty on their saving throws. It doesn't affect their spellcasting that causes saving throws. Fear says you can't approach the source of your fear. It doesn't affect how they can attack at range. So, Van Richten's great book. They have some great material on horror there. But their their fear mechanic of just save versus the frightened condition, and then the stress mechanic. I do recommend looking them up. They have value, but they can't be the only fear or stress mechanic we're using in a party, because our spellcasters who induce saving throws do not care about the fear frightened condition, and they do not care about the stress. Obviously, hurting your saving throws isn't the greatest. You don't even want to make your con saves, keep your spells going. But it's not the same as a fighter going up with -2 on all attack rolls because they're frightened. Imagine your fighter's a -2 on all attack rolls, and the wizard in the back row is just like acid splash, roll dex save. Acid splash, roll dex save doesn't affect them at all. And it's quite unfortunate if that's the mechanic you try and use. The fighter's going to feel penalized, and the wizard's not going to feel like it's frightening. It's not a good mechanic to use in that regard. So Ryan says, so much of horror is the feeling of the game. Mechanics can only kind of help. Like, mechanics can't make a session funny either. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think I'm actually going to save... I actually will do, I'm pretty sure, a video on making games frightening. I'm going to save that for October. But with some of the revision for 5e going through right now, I couldn't resist engaging with the mechanics. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in this video, focusing a bit more about on the mechanics of things, the rules of things, and I think they merge. Like AO says, what are some good ways to add a horror feeling to a game? Yeah, I think Van Richten's, as well as Heroes of Horror from 3rd edition, as well as White Wolf's Ravenloft from 3rd edition, as well as 2nd edition Ravenloft. I think there are so many great books and topics that tackle how to make it scary for your players, how to add the feeling of horror to a game. It's so rich, it's worth another video. But I don't disagree with how they handle that. I think they handle that well. I think those books give great advice on how to make a game kind of creepy. But what they don't do is show you how to marry mechanics and story together. How to bring, I'm feeling fear. Why is my character still the bravest one in the room? Why is my character somehow, or vice versa, if you're the type of player that you're drinking a little bit during the game, so you're not actually frightened by the NPC dying, you think it's kind of funny, but then the mechanics help remind you, oh, my character should be role-playing that they're scared, because I'll earn inspiration from that indefinite madness flaw that I just acquired. I'll earn inspiration for responding to that fear in a way that shows that the character is now changed as a result of it. I think the mechanics can bring it out, and that's what I might move to here next, because we've kind of looked at the stuff from the Dungeon Master's Guide. What are its weaknesses, its strengths. We've looked at Van Richten's, how does it handle it, what does it do well, what does it not do well. And I think that leads me to we here on Session Prep, those of you joining me in the audience, we can do better. I think we can come up with a better, I've playtested a few different ones. I've always modified it a little bit, so I have some of my own DMing to lean back on. But I think we can do better. So I want to I guess ask in our chat, given what some of the things that we've looked at and gone through, what with those things in mind, what could be done better? How can we use mechanics to bring out the fear? And AO says using inspiration is an interesting point. Yeah, I'm going to lean on that one. That's one that I'll use. And while I ask that to chat, I'm going to put some of our notes in the on the left-hand side of the screen here, so I can use a fresh sheet of graph paper there. So what are ways, like what kinds of mechanics, or how can we use it? Is inspiration the only way to bring about, to provoke kind of a feeling of fear in the characters and maybe the players as well? How does the DMG do it with something we covered? There was short-term madness is too debilitating. Indefinite flaws are pretty good. How does Van Richten's? I'm not gonna spell Van Richten's right, so I'll just put VRs do it. Oh, Van Richten's Ravenloft. How does Van Richten's Ravenloft do it? Seeds of Fear is, in my opinion, not for horror. Fear and stress are unbalanced for melee versus casters. If it doesn't collect with the rules, why are we using it? Why are we using rules if the rules don't work for us? That's my that's the essence of that. You can throw them out. So we can do a better system. We can make better horror and madness. Ryan says, one of my players was plenty scared that the dungeon was a ghost, aged them up to 40 years. Wonderful. Love when ghosts can do that. Throwback to the previous session prep episode. AO says, as you mentioned previously, ghost agent characters, yeah, it's damn scary. Draining XP. Draining XP is damn scary, yeah. I like that one. I'm gonna put that one at the top of the list. Get our dice back on the page there. Not in case we need them, but so the thumbnail looks better. There we go. Yeah, so making better fear. Making better fear. Making a better horror system. Making a better fear system. Ryan says, to some extent, I think fear is when you don't know what's going to happen, so maybe each room's corridor can use a new effect of some sort. Ryan says, the players never know what's coming or how to have the next roll be. Maybe a quick path through is smarter. Butcher and Diablo is damn scary. Yeah, I think that's true. I think both of those things are absolutely true, which you could say the mystery element... Mystery element is a great one. Them not knowing in advance, you know, I think that's an excellent one to use. Oh, my alarm's going off there. I think that's an excellent one to use. The mystery element. And I think it's important to keep in mind, because I would say if you come up with a horror system, don't share it with your players in advance. If you're going to come up with your own rules elements, keep them hidden. That way the mystery will still scare them because they won't know how their characters will be affected. And AO suggested an XP, experience point draining attack. Yeah, and AO said the Butcher and Diablo as well. Yeah, I mean, these are the types of fear which hopefully we can induce in our characters with even without a horror game. The fear of failure, the fear of loss, fear of death, fear of irrevocable changes in the storyline that you want to avoid. I think there is something powerful. We talked about unique monster powers that the players aren't ready for. I wouldn't always recommend XP draining attack, you know, especially as a 5e designer. I can't put XP draining into any of the releases, in part because some parties don't use experience points. A lot of them use story-based leveling, like, oh, you hit level 2 because we finished the adventure. You hit level 3 because we got back to town, whatever it is. So, but you know your party, if you're using XP, an XP draining attack, it can certainly be scary. When they see it happen once, it may only be 100 experience points, but the party will go, what? That can happen to my character? And they will run, they will hide. We have some other great suggestions in chat here. Theo says, the DM scaring the players, reminding them of some terrifying foe they thought they'd left behind by calling to mind the dramatic characteristics like scratching bone sound in the darkness or a dry cackling laugh outside the door. Or the butler repeating a phrase they'd only heard the vampire villain use before. Absolutely. I love those moments of horror. I think you've just got some great ones there, AO. Line of sight is darkness. The characters can't see what's at the range of the torch. They are hearing sounds. Truly terrifying. It's the mystery again. The mystery comes. Rust Monster is terrifying for the same reason. Rust Monster is the same as the experience points. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, some of the, yeah, absolutely. I won't touch on monster attacks because it has some overlap with our previous video. And I'll set aside techniques of mystery to an extent because I want to see what kinds of rules we can use to inspire fear and madness done in a way that actually provokes good role playing, makes a good story, makes the table fun to be at. Dungeon Master's Guide, if you're out of rolling 3 minutes on Indefinite Madness, and that's 3 minutes, that's not that long. Okay, it's not that long if you're exploring a room. It's 30 rounds of combat. It's 30 rounds of combat, my guy. Who wrote that? Who wrote that into the Dungeon Master's Guide? My goodness, I can rant about that for ages. The first time I ever put that on a player, and then I realized, I thought I could just use the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then I realized that they have to sit out of the entire fight. Whoops. I didn't realize I was doing that. That's a DM faux pas. Make someone sit out of the entire combat. Wonderful, great DMing. No, we can do better. The mystery element, I think, is a great one. Because the players shouldn't be confident how they're in advance how they're going to be affected. Like the stress mechanic. There's an example. The stress mechanic from Ravenloft. If you use the stress mechanic, the players would know right away within the first 1-2 times they get hit with the stress mechanic how it works. It's a penalty. My character has the jitters, so they have a -1. They have the shakes, so they have a -2. They are truly terrified. They have a -3 as it builds up. So that's a reminder. The stress mechanic is a reminder of how scared you are to act. Your character is, but it doesn't have the mystery element, and it doesn't provide any prompts. I think we can borrow the DMG's Indefinite Madness flaws. This is a system of flaws and inspiration. I said earlier that the Dungeon Master's Guide system is a little bit upside down. How do we correct it? I think reverse it. Dungeon Master's Guide says you get a short-term madness first, the second instance you get a long-term, the third instance you get an indefinite. Reverse it. Flip it fully on its head. Do it the other way around. I would say the first instance you get an indefinite. So the first time you fail wisdom saving throw. So first save fail. Then you get an Indefinite Madness flaw. Do it right away. Indefinite Madness flaw. They're not that debilitating. They're long-term, but they're only long-term until the characters can heal them with a lesser restoration, or can maybe to even take a long rest. I just think greater restoration for Indefinite. But, that's a powerful spell. They have to go back to town, but it's not that debilitating to have a role-playing prompt that a character can choose to roleplay or choose not to roleplay. So I would say just start right there. With your first failed wisdom save, give them an Indefinite Madness flaw. And then I've used this system when I done DM'd. I did Out of the Abyss, levels 1 through 8. Maybe we only made it to 6. But I did a weekend marathon where the party played as the Out of the Abyss adventure and needed to escape the Underdark to get to the surface. We didn't do the second half, but it was 3 days. 48 hours from 7 p.m. the first day to 7 p.m. the third day, or the end of the second day, where the party had needed to escape the Abyss. And Out of the Abyss recommends using the Dungeon Master's Guide, Fear, Horror, and Madness. And I looked at that and I was like, no, flip it upside down. So the first failure is an Indefinite Madness flaw. But then I noticed the party I mean, they did have a bit of fear of like what was coming next. Like, oh, we failed the first one, and then they were wondering is how much worse is it going to get? What happens if we fail the second check? Because I told them make a note. So make a note that you failed one check. Ryan says so many of the fun cursed items is finding out that they are cursed after a while. Similarly, is the way to simulate madness. Oh, make it happen. Okay. Maybe the dungeon the player privately starts receiving letters about a conspiracy, but the pages are blank for everyone else. Ooh, I love that. Like actually, not to say just actually gaslighting your players, but within the participatory world of the story, actually changing things. No, I can. I've run a game like this where I would ask for a perception check, and then I had written down secretly the math so that I would know if someone rolled a 14 on a perception check, that meant they actually got a 12 on their wisdom saving throw. So it's asking for perception checks, but what I was secretly doing was getting wisdom saves out of the party, and then I was handing out notes. I pre-prepared the notes, so I didn't have to write them at the table. And if you failed your wisdom save, I handed you a note that showed you something horrific, like you were getting haunted by a ghost. And the party that succeeded their perception checks, they got a note that said, you see nothing. And they thought, oh, I got an 18, I didn't roll high enough. They had no clue that the people who failed were seeing the much more horrific things until that began to develop. It was a nice little mechanic. It was a lot of labor to produce those notes in advance. Totally worth it for a one-shot. Couldn't do it regularly, could do it for that adventure. Highly recommend it if no one's tried it before. The secret notes, the kind of like recreating the madness experience. I would recommend it if anyone wants to delve down that kind of immersive DMing. So my players, when they were failing the first whiz save, they were kind of like, how bad is this going to get? They didn't quite know. I kind of wish I had a tally system. I wish we had better used, and this is a throwback to the Call of Cthulhu, a sanity score, or a stress score, you could call it. A stress score or a sanity score. Essentially, I picture you could give your party, if a character has a wisdom of 14, you give them a sanity score, stress score of 14. Characters with wisdom of 18, your clerics or healers, give them a higher stress score. Why not? Essentially, every time you have them roll a wisdom saving throw against madness, you can take away, 1d6, minus 1d6 stress, minus 1d8 stress. You can start taking that number away. And when they fail, they get a flaw the first time. So we've got a flaw. And they lost some points off the score. I think that's useful because you've got this tangible tick down of seeing how stressed your character is getting. And then they know there's something very frightening waiting for them when they hit 0 on that score. So we've used Indefinite Madness Flaw. I would say if we flip the Dungeon Master's Guide system on its head, upside down, I would say second tier, so we've lost points. Second tier, we could go to the long-term madness from the Dungeon Master's Guide. Dungeon Master's Guide's long-term madness. I think that's got some value to it. Once a character has already developed a flaw, they've got a nervous tick. They need to be drunk to deal with the horrors of the dungeon. They can't stop laughing at things. After they're starting to crack, then the second failed save, we could say second failed save, or you could say if their stress and sanity score goes below 8, you could say, or stress below. If their stress or sanity score goes below 8, or they've had their second failed save, however you want to tick it off, then you can roll on the long-term madness table for the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, I would say that one is a middle ground because it lasts die 10 times 10 hours. So it lasts between 10 hours and 100 hours, 4 days. That's a weird tick down. I would almost say die 10 long rests, or I would say just say to the end of the adventure. But something crucial about that long-term madness table, some of them you can't use. For example, still 96 to 100 on that table. the character falls unconscious, no amount of jostling or damage can wake the character. If they've only failed their second save, don't push them into unconsciousness for 4 days. Like, what kind of game are you playing that you're telling a player, by the way, you can't join the rest of this adventure for 4 days because we hit you with a long-term madness? I would say trim those ones. There's if I wanted to mark in my book, I put it on the camera, we'd cross out the ones we don't like. No, I would say trim those ones. There's a couple that, the first one is great. If they roll 1 to 10, the character feels compelled to repeat a specific activity over and over, such as washing hands, touching things, or praying, or counting coins. Yes. For the next 100 hours. Yes. Why not? You've got a flaw. You're starting to see it even get worse. And as I pointed out before, if you can kind of skim the list, roll 2, pick the best one, pick the closest one, roll and read 1 above, 1 below, and pick the best out of 3. If you can match it to what caused the fear, like for example, if we did that technique of rolling a perception check that was actually a wisdom saving throw, those who roll low see the ghost. So you see the red shirt who perished previously in the dungeon, your own ally. You see its broken body in ghostly form standing near you, and you failed your wisdom save, so we're going to deduct some sanity. So from that point forward, you compelled, so you rolled 0-1, you're compelled to look over your shoulder. You're constantly looking for this thing. That's an excellent push. At this stage, as I said in the previous one, the players are more if you debilitate them, they're much more accepting of that debilitation if you debilitate the characters, if the dice did it to them. So we're having cumulatively debilitating kind of fear effects to kind of bring out the feeling at the table. And if they failed 2 in a row, we're onto our second failed save. They're going to be your players are going to be much more accepting of you forcing that to be debilitating, but not unconscious for 100 hours debilitating, but more like instead of giving them inspiration and making it an option, they now must role play looking over their shoulder. You would instruct of them. You can still share inspiration though. I mean, if they can earn it, they can earn it from role playing. Yeah, AO says you can use online play to have those secret notes and copy paste them. Yeah, I think when I did it, I was using paper and cutting them with scissors, but absolutely. Then I think if we've fully flipped the Dungeon Master's Guide system on its head, we've gone, we took Indefinite, put it at the top, kept long-term in the middle. That means your third one, I think I have room here at the bottom. Finally, we get to a short-term madness. I think flipping it on its head is going to rescue that system so much more than it already was. The short-term madness effects. If they reach stress of 0, if your party members reach stress of 0, or if they fail their third check, whatever order you're doing it in, if you're just using saves or if you want to tally stress damage, because if you're tallying this damage, you're going to need a repair mechanic. You're going to need to say, oh, you heal some on a long rest. Oh, the lesser restoration spell restores some. So if you have a sanity mechanic with points, you're going to need a recovery mechanic as well, which we won't really have time to get into in this stream, but I'm just giving you the basis of how you could just use the charts in Dungeon Master's Guide have some value, but you have to be much more cautious of when you provoke them. The short-term madness, as I mentioned, that takes a character out of the encounter. And so that should be the third failed save. When a character is near the end of their stress score, when a character's already gotten 2 madness levels, they've already failed 2 saves, they know they failed 2 saves, the third one is going to be worse. When that finally clicks, I mean, one of them is you just start attacking people. Those are brutal. Saving those ones that represent really snapping, saving those for the final encounter, the third step. I've run out of sanity. The characters see it coming. They're going to dread hitting that 0. They're going to dread failing that third save, and they're like, here we go. This is bad. And at that point, if they're out of the encounter, I mean, at least by the time they fail the third save, you're near the end of the adventure. The first failed save, making someone sit out of your adventure after their first wisdom save in the first room of the dungeon, horrible idea. Making them sit out of the rest of the adventure because people are dying left and right, and it's 11:30 at night because your session's almost done, and the final monster is bearing down on them, and they unfortunately messed up their third roll in a row, and they suffer the consequences just for the rest of that encounter. They can accept that a lot more. That's a much more respectful way to have these kinds of rules that provoke the consequences of fear and madness without in a way that hopefully will be fun for your parties overall, because that is why we're playing with fear, madness, and horror. We think it's a little bit fun. We think it's fun to use, and we want to use it in a way that's more fun for everyone at the table. That's why we use session 0 full circle. That's why we use session 0 make sure when you use Fear, Horror, and Madness, it's still fun. That's why we tossed out the DMG's system. Ryan says, I like the system thing. That makes sense. Thank you for the credit. I did playtest it, so I would myself. So I would encourage others to try it out. But essentially, you have those charts in the DMG. The old expression, don't toss the baby out with the bathwater. Don't toss the chart out with the rules. We have a great chart. Flip it on its head. There is a way to use it. I'm hitting the end of our stream time here, as we've touched on some neat elements of how to use Fear, Horror, and Madness a little better. In the last little bit of time, I can tackle any topic that you'd want. I can answer, it's a kind of a Q&A to wrap it up if there are any questions. I can tackle Fear, Horror, Madness questions, if anyone, we're still got that in our minds on that. But I can also just tackle any gaming, D&D, RPG questions, any questions you have for me about Dungeon Mastering. Don't mind tackling any of them before we wrap up the stream here. I'll give you a moment, of course, to type out any questions that you have before we finish. I can say, while he may be typing a question, I can say that be sure, of course, to follow Goodman Games on Twitch. Be sure, if you're watching this later on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitch as well, at GMBenn, at GMBenn Show. I have both accounts there. Really welcome it. So Ryan says, anyone ever use music in a session? I don't really, but I wonder if I'm missing out on anything. Oh, Ryan, let me tell you, music in a session, you are missing out. First of all, it's more prep, it's more work. But if you're a musical person, it will come as second nature to you. I use music so often that when I once went in to teach a classroom, not D&D related, entirely unrelated to Dungeons & Dragons, and I thought the classroom was too quiet. I was so used to music while DMing. Highly recommend music during a session. But if it's a lot of extra work, I would recommend you pass it off to a player. Ask someone else to be the DJ and just give them cues. Or moving into combat, can you do something a bit more tense? Can you do something a little bit more? I have found, some of the games I've run, the songs and music we have played has become so emblematic of that campaign that the songs will always remind me of where we were in the campaign, the boss we were facing, the battle we had. Wonderful little mnemonic cues come out of the songs, taking me back to those sessions. But the problem is then that once I have a great song that I use in a campaign, I can't use it ever again because I want to save the fact that it's so linked to those characters, that campaign, that adventure, when I used it before. I once had the party go into a temple of a Hydra that had been locked underground for aeons, so it wasn't a normal Hydra, something was amiss. And when they got inside, there was like strange lights, and we used dungeon kind of electro synthwave for the battle with the Hydra, and it felt like it was like music from out of like Crypt of the Necro Dancer, like really pulsing as they had to fight the Hydra. We'll forever remember that Hydra fight thanks to the music. Similar for horror, a little creepy little horror music works really great. AO says, any other tips to horror games, not fear but horror, as the horrific or maybe just the uncanny? Yeah, I was lumping them together. I was wondering if we needed to take a moment at all during the stream to kind of parse them and separate them. I was kind of thinking like the horrific causes fear and fear triggers madness. How they're kind of like linked in that manner. The words are kind of all looped together a little bit. But I would say I would recommend checking out genres of horror in the Ben Richton's book. They do talk about how there's body horror, there's folk horror, there's mystery horror, there's there's what goes bump in the night, and there's like having an alien burst out of your chest. The uncanny, for example, is covered in there as well. I think that's because there's many ways to do it, and if you were not familiar, I'd say mimic a movie. That'd be my main tip. If you're not certain, and there's so much different types of horror, you're not certain what direction you're going, I would say pick your favorite horror movie, or pick a movie that has horror elements, and use it however you like. Use that. Mimic your horrific off of what happened in that film, and your campaign will be richer for it, and no one will notice. They will think it's amazing. In fact, if they do notice, if they realize, hey, we're just playing Sigourney Weaver's in Aliens, they'll say, amazing, I always wanted to play Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. Thank you so much for running this adventure. So you rip off a movie, use it. Highly recommend it. Couldn't recommend it enough. AO says, Videodrome in the Realms, a magic scroll gets absorbed into your stomach, and you have to pull it out of your stomach to cast it. I don't know that I want to play in your game there, yo. Body horror, love horror, body horror. Ooh, gets me right in the gut. Okay, as always, everyone, thank you for watching and have a good session.